May 12th, 1945. The train slowed with a shudder, iron wheels screeching against the rails, and the women inside leaned forward, their faces pale beneath grime, their uniforms wrinkled, boots cracked, and hair tied in makeshift knots, soldiers without weapons, auxiliaries without a war, women without a homeland. Rumors had haunted them for days. Execution, starvation, violation, endless labor in mines. No one knew what awaited them. When the train doors groaned open, instead of shouts or snarling dogs, a strange quiet washed over them, followed by the clean scent of open air that did not reek of smoke or steel. A young woman of about 24 stepped down first, clutching her thin coat around her as if it were the last armor she possessed. She had prepared herself for cruelty, braced her heart for humiliation. But then something impossible drifted toward her, warm, greasy, rich, unmistakable. The smell of bacon sizzling. She froze, as did the women behind her. Bacon was a memory from another life, from mornings before rationing, before bombings, before the world collapsed. To smell it here, at the edge of captivity, was like hearing laughter at a funeral. Her empty stomach clenched in pain as she remembered her last meal in Germany. Thin broth stretched with turnips and stale bread that crumbled like dust. Now the Americans, neatly dressed, calm, disciplined, were cooking pork for prisoners. The women were led into neat lines by guards, whose rifles were held not with threat, but with routine. They were marched into a camp that felt unsettling in its order. Wooden barracks neatly arranged, straw mattresses aligned, sunlight spilling through windows, buckets of water prepared for washing. It wasn't comfort, but it was far from torment, and when they entered the mess hall, the crackle of bacon on iron pans filled the air like a ghost of plenty, the plates handed to them holding potatoes, bread, and strips of glistening bacon that shimmered with salt and fat. The two 4-year-olds stared at her plate, her hand trembling, torn between pride and hunger. Her mother had died in an air raid. Her father had vanished on the Eastern Front. Her brother was lost somewhere in the ruins of Leipzig. She wanted to refuse the food, to cling to defiance, but hunger broke her. The first bite hit her like grief. Warm, salty, overwhelming, dragging tears from her eyes in spite of herself. Around her, women ate in silence, some laughing through their tears. Guards stood by with quiet detachment, one even offering a small shrug that seemed to say, "It's just breakfast," a gesture more dangerous than cruelty, because it cracked the wall of hatred they had been trained to hold. In the weeks that followed, the inner war grew fiercer than any fought with guns. They had been fed propaganda for years. Americans as savages, brutes, mercenaries who mutilated prisoners, and now, these same SS Live, monsters handed them bread softer than anything German civilians had seen in years, coffee that wasn't burnt barley, meals that arrived with discipline rather than mockery. Some women wept from confusion, others hardened their hearts even more. But each day, the Americans offered not only food, but ideas. A classroom was set up inside a long hut, benches arranged, a chalkboard raised. The first word written on it, freedom, hung in the air like a challenge. They learned English phrases, awkward on their tongues. They watched films, grainy images of concentration camps, mass graves, liberation scenes, and denial broke like thin glass. Some women whispered that the films were lies, others cried silently. All were shaken. Books were handed out, including novels, histories, poetry abundance that felt like an affront after watching books burn in German squares only years earlier. The 4-year-old found herself secretly reading Huckleberry Finn at night, the strange freedom of the boy on the raft pulling her away from everything she had believed. Guards sometimes joked, sometimes helped. Their humanity felt like a trick, yet it persisted with such consistency that suspicion slowly ruptured from within. The bacon, once a shock, had become a symbol, a weapon not of force, but of contradiction. And just as the lessons began to settle into their bones, release day came. The women stepped out of the camp changed in ways they could not yet articulate. The train ride home felt like traveling through the ashes of a broken world. Villages flattened, chimneys rising like broken teeth, bridges twisted metal over silent rivers. Back in Germany, chaos ruled. Children begged in the streets, their cheeks sunken. Women bartered scraps for survival. The 4-year-old walked through ruins where her home once stood. A neighbor told her plainly that her entire family was gone. Her relatives eyed her with suspicion she had been a prisoner, yet she had eaten. Others whispered that American captives had been brainwashed, fattened, softened. She carried guilt like a stone. She had tasted bacon, while German children starved. When aid trucks arrived with American food supplies, she stood frozen as she received a tin stamped with the enemy's label. Her relatives devoured it gratefully, praising American abundance, and something twisted painfully inside her. She began writing again in her notebook clumsy English sentences. Memories of the camp. Questions she dared not speak aloud. The taste of bacon became her secret burden. The moment her belief system cracked, she could not hate the Americans the way she was expected to. She could not pretend the camp had been torture when it had fed and taught and sheltered her better than the ruins of her homeland now could. One evening she walked through the rubble of her street, sat upon a broken stone, and wrote in English, "I am still alive." The words felt fragile, yet powerful. Her first step toward a new identity. She realized survival was not the end of her struggle. The real battle was within, between memory and indoctrination, between grief and awakening, between loyalty to the dead and the possibility of a different future. The war had ended, but the meaning of everything was still unfolding. And as she stood, clutching her notebook, the echo of sizzling bacon lingered not as food, not as mercy, but as the dangerous beginning of a new truth, one that would shadow her for the rest of her life. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon.